Okay, go ahead.
All right, like Cody said, my name is Richard Duncan. I'm here with the Fannin Central Appraisal District. We're going to be looking at agricultural special appraisal in Fannin County. We'll go over some general stuff, like you said, for the state level. So if you are in a different county, you will be getting some pretty critical information that you need to be aware of. Reach out to your local appraisal office to find your specific information that you may need. So let's get started. Bear with me one moment. So a little bit about me. I graduated in May of 2019 from Lubbock Christian University. Cody might say different, but I think this is the best school out in Lubbock. And I got a bachelor in science and animal science. After graduating, I went on to the Noble Research Institute, spent a summer there as one of their scholar interns. And our office here in Fannin County does some work with them. So that connection led me down here to be the agricultural appraiser. My contact information is embedded in a slideshow. I think Cody might hopefully have it available to get out to y'all. This is the best way to get a hold of me. My office number and extensions there. Email is great. I'm pretty good about responding to email quickly. I get a lot of phone calls. So if you do call, leave me a voicemail and I will get back to you. It may take a little bit, but I do return every call that I get. So today we're going to be looking at what is agricultural special appraisal. We'll talk about some of the benefits of having ag. We'll go over a little bit of who's who in this whole agricultural appraisal deal. We'll talk about the qualifications that you have to meet. We'll talk about how to file your applications and when to do so. We'll go over appraiser actions, and then we're going to wrap up and hopefully have time for some questions as well. So agricultural special appraisal, excuse me. This is commonly referred to as an exemption, but it is actually a special appraisal. So an exemption, you are exempted out of certain taxable value. A special appraisal, you are given a special appraisal value instead of a market value. 1D1 Ag was the first iteration to hit the tax appraisal scene for agriculture. Section 1D was added to Article 8 of the Texas Constitution in 1966, and it is for property owners whose primary source of income is from agricultural production. Section 1D1 was added shortly after in 1978, and it is for property owners who use their property for ag production but don't necessarily live off the land. And 1D1 Ag is found in the Texas Property Tax Code, subchapter D. So there's the majority of the legal mumbo jumbo we'll have to go through. But I want to bring your attention to some important dates that you need to be on your calendar, both for ag and general property appraisal. January 1st is the effective date of appraisal. So when you get your notice of value and it tells you what your value is, it's based on your property's value January 1st. February 1st is the day that your unpaid taxes become delinquent from the year before. So at this point in time, the 2020 taxes, if they have not been paid, are delinquent. April 30th is the biggie. That is the deadline to file for your ag appraisal. And it's also the deadline to file for your homestead exemption. So you want to make sure to get those in by April 30th. In late April, early May, we'll start to send out our notices of value. You'll have 30 days from the date on that letter to protest your value of the property, or maybe you don't have ag showing up and you think it should be there. That's your window to protest. In June and July, we'll be conducting our hearings. And in July, after we've heard all of the property disputes, we will certify the roll. Now, we can actually accept late applications for ag up until we certify that roll sometime in July, but there's a 10% penalty added on to your taxable value. So we definitely want to make sure to get it in April, by April 30th, to make sure you avoid the penalties. And we never know what that day is going to be in July. We stop accepting them anyway. So be sure to apply on time by April 30th. And then October 1st of every year, that's when your taxes officially become due. So what are the benefits of ag? Well, you get to be valued at a productivity value instead of your market value. So for example, if your land is valued at, say, $5,000 an acre, but you qualify in ag to be in an improved pasture value. Well, for 2020, that improved pasture value was $132.30 an acre. So when you receive your tax bill based on what our local entities decide their tax rate is, Instead of being taxed at a $5,000 an acre value, you're only being taxed at a value of $132 an acre. So in this particular example, we're looking at approximately a 97.4% reduction. So that may vary based on your market value, what your productivity value is for your specific use on your property. But no matter how you shake it out, it's a very large reduction in your taxable value and a big savings for you. The Comptroller Manual for Agricultural Appraisal directs the appraisal district to estimate the property's annual net income based on its category of use. We divide that number by a capitalization rate, which we get from the Comptroller's office, and historically and usually that's 10%. And we base our annual net income on a cash lease method. And we gather all that information from a variety of sources. Predominantly, we're using USDA and FSA data. We get information from local AgriLife extension offices. So that would be from Cody and from our Agricultural Advisory Board. Now, we're required to base the annual net estimates on a 5-year rolling average. And we look at the preceding year before the year of appraisal. So what that means is for the 2021 tax year, we're going to be looking at these productivity values from the years 2019, 2015. So those 5 years, we're going to take the average of those 5, and that's going to be our value for the year 2021. And we'll look at that for each class of land that ag qualifies for. So improved pasture, native pasture, beekeeping, et cetera, is all based on a rolling 5-year average for their specific use. Let's talk about who are the players in agricultural special appraisal. First of all, we got the legislature. They create and amend laws. So in our case, that's the tax code. So anything that we do is going to be directly affected by the legislature. So they'll be in session this year. So we will almost always see some kind of update from them. So they're the first level that creates property taxes and the law for us. The Comptroller's Office gives us direction and assistance to appraisal districts and administering that tax code. So we have manuals from them, we have directives from them. They can also answer some general questions for property owners as well. And then you have the local appraisal districts. The chief appraiser is ultimately responsible for all appraisal done in the county that we service. I work for him as the agricultural appraiser. So I do all the ag work under his directive. The other players that we have is the Agricultural Advisory Board. Our Ag Advisory Board meets with us at least twice a year to help determine the degree of intensity standards for ag in Fannin County and insist in developing those productivity rates and kind of checking some of our work. So what all that means is these are local producers, local ag officers in different entities. They all help us see what does ag actually look like in Fannin County, and they help us crunch the numbers. So you can see who our current Ag Advisory Board members are up here on the screen, Cody being one of them. In order to qualify for ag, we have to go through 2 levels of qualifications. First of all, we have, I'm sorry, I think I've had this up here the whole time. I hope that's not getting in your way. Well, we have our state level requirements from the tax code. In order to qualify for ag, your land has to be principally devoted to agriculture for 5 out of the preceding 7 years. A special case is if you're in the city limits, you have to be using your property for 5 consecutive years. There are a number of different ways you can qualify your property for ag, including cultivating the soil, producing crops, floriculture, viticulture, and horticulture, raising and keeping livestock, so your typical cattle, sheep arrangements, and you can also raise and keep exotic animals. Now that's conditional on a few other items in the tax code that specify what keeping exotic animals looks like in order to qualify. You can also plant cover crops or leave your property idle as a part of a normal productivity or production rotation. So if you're planting your fields year after year after year and you let it rest, kind of rebuild some of that soil nutrients instead of taking it all out, that's acceptable. You can also plant cover crops or leave your land idle in participating in a government program. So whether that's CRP programs or an EQIP program, something like that. You can also harvest logs, and timber posts for agricultural improvements on your property. So what that looks like is actually clearing your land and using the clearing lumber that you've produced off your own land to improve your property to use it for ag. Beekeeping also qualifies for agricultural appraisal, as does wildlife management. But to get wildlife management, your property has to be in ag for the previous year. So that's a quick snapshot of the state requirements. So now I'm going to get into what it actually looks like for us in our county. Now remember, our agricultural advisory board meets with us every year, and we go over these degree of intensity standards and kind of refresh every couple of years or every year to see what does ag look like in our county. So for 2021, this is what we're looking at. You qualify for livestock. We're looking at a typical minimum acreage of 10 acres for native pasture. In some situations, that might be a minimum of 8 acres if you qualify for improved pasture. For cattle, we're looking at 1 animal unit for every 10 acres. Animal units defined as a 1,000-pound cow with a calf. I'm really looking for 1 cow for every 10 acres. Most cattle these days, full grown, are going a little over 1,000 pounds. So as long as you've got 1 head for every 10 acres, that'll qualify you for cattle. For sheep, we're looking at 5 head for every 10 acres. And for goats, we're looking at just around 7 for every 10 acres. A lot of people ask about horses, and for horses, you can qualify for ag. It's kind of a gray area, and there are some specific requirements you've got to meet. We're looking at 1 for every 12.5 acres. You've got to either be breeding those horses and be a breeder, and I might ask you for that documentation to prove it up on an application, or you've got to be using your horses for an agricultural purpose. So you've actually got to be out there riding, herding your cattle in. You can't just have them out in the backyard as a pet. That doesn't qualify. The tax code and comptroller manual actually specifically talks about horses for recreational purposes not qualifying. So like I said, it's a bit of a gray area, but they can qualify if you meet some certain requirements. You can also qualify for cutting and baling hay or for growing crops, as long as you're doing so on at least 3 acres. Or excuse me, on 10 acres. If you have an orchard or a vineyard and you have at least 3 acres dedicated to those uses, you can qualify for those as well. Beekeeping, we're looking at a state mandated 5-acre minimum. So that's in the tax code. You have to have at least 5 acres. In our county, we're looking at a minimum of 6 hives on that 5 acres to qualify for bees. For each additional hive that you add, you can gather another 2.5 acres into your land under the ag appraisal. And the state only gives us a maximum of 20 acres that can be used for bees. And you can also qualify with a government program. Hold on just a moment. I forgot to pull up this chat box. I want to make sure I can see your questions. If you're in a government program and you apply for that, that does qualify you for ag, as mentioned in the state level requirements. What I'm going to be looking for is that you have a current USDA contract on file. And if you can turn that in with your application, that way we can see it and just prove that you're in a current contract. If your contract expires, you'll need to either reapply or send us in an updated contract to keep your property under that valuation.
Hey, Richard, this is Cody.
Yes, sir.
Hey, while we're on this slide right here, not to bring up a question or anything, but
go ahead.
It's a question that comes up through my office all the time throughout the year, and I know you get this question a lot too. So if a person has 25 acres and they're wanting to do bees, the question comes up all the time, well, can I resurvey my property, get 2 farm numbers on that, and divide it up, half here and half there, then can I do bees on 2 different property numbers?
I think we might have one landowner that has talked to me about that, and that we might pursue that option. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I don't know for sure the answer to that question. That might be a case-by-case basis that I need to talk with the chief about. Sure. As far as per parcel, I mean, it would make sense to be able to do that. I just don't want to tell everyone, yes, we can, or no, we can't. I'm going to leave that as a case-by-case basis, and we'll take a look at that. But you're right, that has been asked before. And if you're in that situation and you're wanting to do that, shoot me an email, give me a call, come in and talk to me, and we can kind of look and see what that would look like for you. And we can try to make something work if we've got the legal ability to do so. Absolutely.
Obviously, it's more money for sure, because getting a survey and dividing that place up. So, but I just wanted to bring that up because I know I get that question a lot, and I know you do as well. So,
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I do have that chat box pulled up now. My apologies for kind of stepping in the middle of it there. So if you got questions, of course, you can put them in there. And Cody, feel free to jump in at any time. Of course, we do have wildlife here in Fannin County. We actually have quite a bit. It's growing pretty rapidly. Again, to receive wildlife on your property, you have to be receiving ag appraisal the year before. So that's a state requirement. There's nothing I can do to change it. It would be nice if you could go straight into wildlife. A lot of folks have good wildlife land, but then you've got to do a lot of work to it to get it ready for ag. So just be aware that you do have to be receiving ag on your property before you can convert it into wildlife. Typically in our county, we're looking at a minimum of 12.5 acres under your ownership to qualify. If you're in a wildlife management association, so say you and a couple buddies have a few smaller tracts of land, but together you meet at least 16.6 acres, we can get all of your land in and wildlife as a management association. Now, one exception to this rule is that if a property is part of a larger piece of land, so if you have multiple parcels that make up at least 12.5 acres, but one of those parcels is less than the 12.5 acre requirement and is then sold off, it's under different ownership, that property can still receive wildlife management below that 12.5 acre threshold, so long as it continues to be used for wildlife in its entirety. So an example of that would be if you have a 7-acre parcel and a 13-acre parcel, they're owned by one person, we've got 20 acres, it's all in wildlife. If he sells off that 7-acre tract, the new owner can still qualify for that wildlife management if he continues to use that full 7 acres for wildlife. So it's kind of something we just discovered recently. It kind of gets a little bit muddy in those waters, but what you need to know is if you're wanting to switch your property over into wildlife, you have to have at least 12.5 acres. You're required to do 3 out of 7 qualifying management activities that are on the wildlife plan, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. And the tax code allows for the chief appraiser to require an annual report, and we have selected to take advantage of that option here in Fannin County. So if you're in wildlife management, you have to submit an annual report every year giving us an update on your wildlife management plan in order for you to continue to receive that appraisal. We've got a question, does that 12.5 acres have to be adjacent? So yes, your 12.5 acres, it all has to be contiguously used for wildlife management. So if you have multiple small parcels, say you've got a 5-acre tract and another 5-acre tract and another 5-acre tract, 15 acres, they all have to be touching. And of course, you have to have, for all these minimum acreage requirements that we're looking at as being typical in our county, that has to be contiguously used if you have smaller parcels, and it has to be principally devoted for ag. So if you've got some land designated to different uses on your property, at least the minimum acreage requirement has to be used for ag. So I hope that answers that question. So now that we know a little bit about what's required to qualify for ag, we need to know how to apply for ag. There's a slew of reasons why you might need to reapply for ag. You might be changing the property use from, let's say, raising cattle to now you're just going to cut hay. There might be a change of ownership. If you just bought a piece of land, you will have to reapply. There might be a change in the parcel size, whether you've combined several tracts into one or if you sold pieces off. If the acreage changes, we need a new application. Or if the chief appraiser, i.e. me as the ag appraiser, has a reason to question the agricultural actions on your property. Now that question of the property, that might be because I came out or one of our other appraisers came out and you applied for cattle and we didn't see cows out there, so we require a new application. That might be because you've rotated them off to another piece of your property and we didn't see it. It might just be that your property or that your application is outdated. Sometimes the state changes the application requirements, and we have to have a valid application on file. Otherwise, we get in trouble when the comptroller audits us. So if you get a letter requiring you to reapply on your property, don't freak out. If you're still doing ag, all you've got to do is fill out that application, turn it in. I'm going to come verify it and say, yes, they're still doing ag. We're in good shape. And it'll go right back into ag. So if you do get one of those letters requiring you to reapply, just get that application in and we'll be covered.
Hey, Richard, you got one in the chat box. If you have a 20, oh, let me go back to the one before that. So Richard Greer, if you go to a revenue-based appraisal, what does that look like?
As far as how we're getting the ag values, is that what that's referring to?
I don't know. It just says if you go to a revenue base. Richard, if you want to expand on that in the chat box, while he's doing that, we'll jump to another question. He said yes.
Yeah,
that's
so
correct.
we're looking at a cash lease is how we are valuing everything in the county. Cody, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we've done some shared lease as far as crops go for what's typical. We just rely on our ag board to tell us what's the typical leasing arrangement in the county. There are a couple of different methods that we can approach that with in the comptroller manual, and that's getting really into the weeds. We don't really have time for that today. If you do want to take a look at that, you can look up the manual for the appraisal of agricultural land. And that's a manual from the comptroller. Again, that's the manual for the appraisal of agricultural land. And it discusses how we get those ag values a little more specifically there. It looks like there's another question. If you have a 20-acre bee exemption on 40 acres, can you convert the 40 over to wildlife? So if you've got 40 acres and 20 of it's in bees, as long as you're receiving the bee value on that property, that 20 acres can be converted over into wildlife. I've had a number of people put their property into bees. They're working on building history. Once it gets into ag, they're going to switch it over to wildlife and then start the remainder of their properties on bees. So it's a long process to get all your property rolled over into wildlife that way. Unfortunately, that's kind of the only option we have at the moment based on what the tax code says. So if you are wanting to get your property into wildlife, like I said, you have to build history on ag. If you're doing it by bees, you can only do that in 20-acre blocks at a time. So hope that answers that question. Getting back to the applications, there's 2 forms that you might have to do. Everyone has to fill out the ag application. This is its official title on the screen. Everyone has to do that in order to get ag. If you are wanting to do wildlife management on your property, you have to turn in that application and a wildlife management plan. Both of those forms are required. So let's run over that application real quick. This is what the generic state form looks like. If you get one printed off from our office through our system, it looks a little bit different, but it has all the same information. Up here at the top, we need to make sure that we have the tax year listed that you're applying for. If you're doing just the generic state form like we have here, go ahead and put in that it's with the Fannin Appraisal District. And if you know your property ID number, then you can list that here in the top as well. Section 1 is general property owner information. So this is information about you as the owner, some contact information, things of that nature. Right below it, we have section 2 for an authorized representative. If you have an individual or an agent filing this on your behalf, we have to have their agent record on file with our office, but they'll fill out this information. But if you're doing it yourself, you don't have to worry about it. You can skip it. Section 3 at the bottom is the property description and information. This is where you're going to tell us how many acres there are on your property. List your property ID number here. List your legal description if you know it down here at this box. I have to know what parcel you're referring to on your application in order to grant you ag or to start processing it to give it its history. So if you have multiple parcels, if they're all touching each other, if they're all contiguous, you can go ahead and list multiple properties on one application. On the next page, we have a continuation of section 3. There's a lot of legalese here in this form, but basically question 1 is asking, has the ownership of the property changed since last year or since the last application? Question 2 is asking, did this property receive agricultural special appraisal last year? And it says, did it receive 1D1 appraisal? Whenever you see 1D1, that means ag. So be sure to answer that question. Question number 3 is asking if the property is in the city limits. Section 4, this is where the real meat is in this application. This is where you tell me what you're using your property for to qualify for ag. So in this example, I'm claiming 60 acres used for ag in total, and my uses are native pasture, dry crop, and wildlife management. Question 2A in this section is asking what kind of livestock and how many acres if I'm using livestock to qualify for ag. So I'm claiming I'm using cattle on 20 acres. 2B is asking how many head. I'm again listing cattle for what kind, and I have 3 head of cattle out there. So I've got 3, the minimum is 2 for this 20 acres. So that'll qualify me. Question number 3, ask what kind of crops are grown. I'm saying that I have 20 acres for crops. I've got a question, is coastal Bermuda considered improved pasture or native pasture? Native versus improved pasture, we're really looking at what are you doing on your property in order to keep up the grasses on your property. Are you fertilizing? Are you spraying? Are you seeding it with improved varieties of grasses? So if you're out there, if you're overseeding and if you're fertilizing, things of that nature, it's going to bump up to improved pasture. It's kind of a mix of a scientific approach and as an input approach. So the scientist side of me wants to be really strict on what's a native variety versus what's an improved variety. Got to put my appraiser hat on and say, okay, what's being put into the land, and has it just, yeah, maybe improved pasture varieties, but if it's been let go and it's not being managed, it's probably going to fall back into native pasture value. But if you're out there taking care of it, fertilizing, seeding, spraying for weeds, things of that nature, looks great, then it's going to be improved. And that's just looking at how much grass can your property produce, because good pasture is going to produce more. You'll be able to produce a little bit more product, more meat on your animals, more head out on your property if it's an improved pasture. Moving on to the next section.
Richard,
yeah, go ahead, Cody.
just real quick, I just kind of want to jump in from our office and kind of say something on that.
Absolutely.
It's real important, just like you said, to kind of be able to distinguish the wording. And if you have questions, that's what myself and Richard are here for. But it's real important to distinguish the different wording between the different offices, because like you said, Richard, with y'all's office, the appraisal district, when you're looking at it from a tax standpoint, it's native versus improved gets into more of a management definition.
Correct.
When you're dealing with my office, or another one that we must mention is the Farm Service Agency when it comes to certifying your grasses. When you're talking improved pastures or improved hay meadows, we're going to be talking about those that have been essentially bred for improved yield or more yield that you can see from that grass. Specifically, you really get into the Bermuda grasses in those point on improved versus native, especially when you improved in Bermuda. That's going to be those sprig varieties, those hybrid varieties. So again, we're here to help answer those questions, and if you're new to it, it may take you some time getting used to it, but each office's definitions are going to be just a little bit different when you're looking at improved versus native.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks like there's a question on about 15 acres. We'll get to that here in a minute, so don't let me forget about that one. We'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. So moving on to the next page of this application. Again, we're still in section 4. Question number 4 is going to ask if you're participating in any government program. So if you're an EQIP, CRP, things of that nature, put that information here. If you're doing wildlife, you can also list that information here. There's not just a great area on the form to list wildlife management. So I encourage you to list that here in this section. So again, I'm claiming 20 acres on this application. Question number 5, right after, that's asking if there's any non-agricultural use on the property. So if you're not using part of your property for ag, you can list that acreage here. Specifically, if you have a home on your property that you're doing ag on, let's say you have 15 acres in ag and you've got 3 acres under your homestead exemption or just as a rental property, something like that, go ahead and list 3 acres here for residential use or for your homestead. And while I'm on that, if you are filing a homestead exemption as well, be sure that whatever acreage is left over that doesn't qualify for ag, be sure that harmonizes with your homestead application. You want to take advantage of as many acreage, as much acres as you can get under that for the non-ag piece. Section number 5 is all about wildlife management. So if you're just doing regular ag, no wildlife, you can skip this section. If you are doing wildlife, you got to fill it out. And the first question is basically a super condensed version of your wildlife management plan. It's asking which out of those 3 7 categories you're doing to qualify. And then the next question right underneath it is asking what kind of land value was your property receiving before converting into wildlife. Wildlife doesn't have its own productivity value. It's based on whatever you switched your property out of. So in this case, I'm saying native pasture. So it'll continue to receive the native pasture value. If you had irrigated cropland that you converted into wildlife, it would continue to receive the irrigated crop value. The remaining questions here are all pertaining to wildlife. We won't get into those right now. If you're filling it out and you don't know the answer to one of these questions, it's probably no. It'll be safe to answer it that way. Last page, section 6, this is talking about conversion to timber production. We actually don't have any active timber production that qualifies in Fannin County. So for everyone, this first question is asking if you've converted to timber production, go ahead and answer that no. The second question is asking if you want 1D1 appraisal. Do you want the ag appraisal? Be sure to answer this yes. And then section number 7, this is just where you need to put down your name. Be sure to print it, put your autograph on there and date it, and then turn it in again no later than April 30th. You can get these applications off of our website. There's a PDF version you can print off. There's an online version that you can complete on our website to submit electronically. I'm happy to take your applications through a scan in an email. You can always mail them in, drop them off in person. I can also get applications sent out to you if you need me to. Just let me know what you need. Let's look briefly at the wildlife management plan. I'm only going to show you 2 screenshots of it. Again, this is the title of that plan. There's an annual report and a wildlife management plan. They're very similar. If you're applying, be sure to give me the plan. If you're giving us the annual update, be sure to use the annual report. Part number 5, this is the most critical piece of this plan. This is our qualifying management activities. So these 7 items, the rest of the form goes on to explain what constitutes qualifying for each item. You've got to do at least 3 of these. So now that you've completed your application, you've turned it in on February the 4th. Today, we're ready to go. It gets to my desk in the pile of paperwork that I'm working through. I'm going to go out and start doing some site inspections here pretty soon and start working on my actions now that you've turned in that application. So like I said, the first thing is a site inspection. Once I've got several properties in a school district, I'm going to come out and I'm going to visit them and just checking to verify that what you've listed on the application is what's going on the property. So if you see this running around the county, that's me. I'm out doing some residential rechecks this spring, doing a lot of ag applications. So if you see this parked on the side of the road or pull up to your gate, just know that's me. We've got a couple other appraisers out doing work as well. We all have lights and magnets on our cars so you can identify us. So once I've done that site inspection, there's 3 potential outcomes and actions that I'm going to take. The first and the most exciting, of course, is an approval. I go out, you're doing ag, great. You get the stamp. I send you a letter saying you're approved for ag on your property. Once you get that letter, so long as you don't change anything, continue to do the same use, you don't sell pieces off, you don't combine, you don't build a house, nothing changes. You're just going to continue to stay in ag. I may go out to your property and I may have some questions. Maybe you rotate your cattle and I didn't see them on that particular parcel the particular day I happened to be there, and I just want to double check and make sure I've got the full story of what's going on. Maybe you didn't quite fill out the form correctly and I need some more information on the form. I'll send you a disapproval letter and you'll have 30 days to respond to that letter, clear everything up, answer whatever questions or clarification points I may need. If you don't respond, then I have to send you a denial after that, which is the third option. So you might get a denial because, again, the disapproval, following up with that, if I didn't hear back from you. It might be that I went and visited your property and I think to myself, man, it really doesn't look like they're doing ag out here. I'm just going to straight deny it. You might be using your property for a different use. You might not have the qualified history on your property. And in that case, I'm going to send you a denial letter and just say, hey, your property has been denied to receive the appraisal, but we're going to start building its history. We're going to keep track of that. Or we have you building history and we're continuing to do so. So just pay attention to what letter you get from me. Be sure to read it and understand the information there. If you do get the denial letter, that will come certified to you, and you do have an opportunity to protest that denial. If you're denied before the application period is over, of course, you can reapply, get a new application in beforehand. Like I said, just pay attention to the letter. If you got any questions, give me a call or shoot me an email. You always have an opportunity to protest those actions that adversely affect you. That can go to a hearing if need be. We might be able to settle it, but just be sure to pay attention to the information in that packet if you get it. One thing I do want to briefly touch on is rollbacks. Hopefully not very many of you will ever have to be subjected to this, but I would be remiss to not touch on it. Technically, this is a change of use determination, is what the tax code calls it. There are a few exceptions. If you change the use of your property out of ag to something else, they're very limited and there's very specific requirements. The one I want to mention here is there's no rollback if you build a house and you homestead your property. So, if you've bought 15 acres of land, you go and put a house on a few acres, file your homestead on it, no rollback for that land. You don't have to worry about it. Rollback tax equals the difference between the taxes that were actually imposed in the 3 years preceding the change of use. So, example, for 2020, what were the taxes for 2019, 2018, and 2017? It's the non-ag tax at its regular market value minus what you've already paid in those ag taxes equal the rollback tax. Hope that's clear. That's kind of a little bit jumbled in how it all works out. And then you're going to be looking at penalties and interest on that because you haven't paid those taxes because they've gone through the ag value, but now it's been converted over. So this is a state requirement. It's not anything we've got an option to do anything about. The tax assessor, so the local elected tax assessor, is required to add a 5% annual interest to these amount from the date that they became due. So that October date of each year, there's a 5% interest on those. So someone thought it was a good idea to exclude the current year in the rollback. So if you converted your property today from ag to, let's say, a commercial storefront property, you would still continue to receive ag for 2021, but you would be rolled back for 2020 back to 2018. One other tool in the appraisal district's tool belt is called erroneously granted. For instance, I've granted ag on a property and I come out later in the year or the next year just to verify it. Maybe I didn't have time because your application came in right on April 30th. We're in the heart of protest season. I just don't have a chance to go out there. I might approve you on the honor system. If I come out later and say, oh, hey, they're really not doing ag out here, I'm actually required to go and take the erroneously granted action on that property. So go and remove ag off the property. There are penalties and interest associated with that. If I do have to do that to you, just remember I have to. That's the law. I don't have a choice to do that action. So if you fill out an application and say you're doing ag, it's always honesty is the best policy, right? So be sure to let us know if you change the use of your property or anything like that, just to stay ahead of the curve. And again, there is that 5% annual interest from the due date on the rollback. And we're looking back 3 years. The erroneously granted can actually go back up to 5 years if necessary. I'd wrap up. The main things I want you to take away from today are your deadlines. Apply by April 30th. Again, turn in your application no later than April 30th. I don't care how you get it to me, just get it in. That way we can avoid any kind of late penalty. It gives us time to fix any mistakes that are maybe on that application, for me to ask any questions that I need to find out. Also pay attention to your deadlines to protest once you get your notice of appraised value, and your deadlines to pay your taxes. Always be looking for that. If we send you a letter in the mail, it's not junk. We don't waste money on junk mail. So everything that we send to you is important. So just be sure to pay attention to that. The 1D1 ag form, that ag application is required for everyone. If you want ag on the property, you've got to turn it into us and tell us what you're doing. And again, if you're doing wildlife management, you have to have that ag application and the wildlife management plan. A brief COVID update. Our office is open. You're more than welcome to come in and take care of whatever business you want to or need to take care of here with us. And we have not received any changes from the comptroller's office or from the governor or from the legislature at this point. So we are still operating as an appraisal district, just like any normal year. We did the same last year. So there's no special COVID exceptions. So just be sure to pay attention to those timelines and business that you need to take care of. There's a number of links here to our website, to some of the comptroller manuals and forms. And that last one is from another CAD's website. They have the text of the tax code up. So if you've got any questions on those, find this PowerPoint. I think it'll be up on YouTube, I think, and Cody should have a copy of it. So these are some good links for you to get some additional information. So at this time, we'll start looking at some questions.